Disney's Atlantis. Did we get it wrong? Why is it so criminally underrated? And can we fix it? Let's find out. Hi, my name is Kyrie and welcome to Flights of Fantasy, the show where we look at different science fiction and fantasy movies and ask, what do they mean? If you haven't seen this movie before, don't worry, I'll go over the plot as we go along. And now let's jump into it and see if yet another childhood movie doesn't live up to my expectations. Right from the opening logo, there's this explosion on the horizon of an ocean. And then we see an army of men riding these machines that look like marine animals. Then they're running away from a giant tsunami wave. Are you interested yet? So they're heading to their city of Atlantis, which is trying to do the mass evacuation amongst chaos and lights. And among those fleeing is the royal family. One of the lights trains on the queen, which makes the crystal around her neck glow. Her young daughter can do nothing but watch as her mom is tractor beamed up into the sky into this swirling, spinning crystal ball of light. The giant spinning crystal ball makes these giant rock guardians create a shield around the epicenter of the city, and it sinks down as the ocean engulfs everything in sight. That is our cold open, and the man responsible for your goosebumps during this scene is composer James Newton Howard. We know him because he also did the music for Space Jam, and he's done the music for a lot of stuff. We arrive in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. and the year is 1914. Milo Thatch, boiler room attendant and linguist, is preparing a presentation for the board of the museum. Following in the large shoes of his explorer grandfather, Milo wants to fund an expedition to find the Shepherd's Journal, which is basically the map to Atlantis. The board reschedules his presentation at the very last second to an hour previous and then denies his proposal outright because he didn't make it to the meeting that they just rescheduled. Milo manages to catch one of the board members as he's trying to flee the museum and threatens to quit if they don't listen to him and fund his proposal. The board member basically says, your grandpa was crazy, and you would be crazy too if you gave up this position and all of your potential to follow in his footsteps of chasing these wild flights of fancy. So Milo heads home defeated, except there's a femme fatale in his apartment. She tells Milo that she has a proposition for him from her employer, and then he's taken to this giant fancy mansion. It's there that we meet Preston Whitmore. He was a longtime old friend of Milo's grandpa, Thaddeus. Mr. Whitmore also has a present for Milo from his grandpa, the Shepherd's Journal. Yeah, so they already went on the expedition to find it, and I guess it's a good thing that the board of the museum didn't fund that expedition. Mr. Whitmore has put together the team, the funding, the machines, everything. He's got everything put together, and now he just needs Milo. Probably the only person on Earth who can read Atlantean because he's been studying dead languages all of his life. So Milo heads off on a submarine towards adventure with a cast of interesting side characters. The submarine comes across a boat graveyard of sorts, and then they're attacked by this giant machine monster, the Leviathan. Submarine is destroyed by the Leviathan, and apparently out of the original crew of over 200 members, most of them have died. Just like Milo had said would happen, they end up in this giant underground cavern and they continue forward. Milo's awkwardness and occasional incompetence make him a clear outcast with the rest of the characters. But after Milo unsuccessfully mansplains Audrey and manages to fix the Big Digger, the rest of the cast ease up on him and even invite him to dinner. Milo realizes that there's a missing page inside the journal, but then it's time for him to shut up because everyone's going to go around the campfire and explain their backstories. We have Audrey, Sweet, Mrs. Packard, Vinny, a lot of side characters, which I'll talk about later, but it's actually a problem with this movie. That night, a group of masked people are investigating the camp and trying to learn more about these intruders. Milo wakes up and makes some glowy bugs angry, which then sets fire to the whole camp. The crew try to escape, but all of them and their vehicles fall into this giant ravine. Fortunately, our ensemble survived. They realize that they're at the base of this dormant volcano, which is gonna make getting out quite a problem. Milo was separated and injured during the fall, and he wakes up to these masked people standing all around him and talking about him. One of them takes off their mask, and it's the little girl from the cold open, all grown up. She uses her crystal to heal Milo's wound, but the masked people quickly scatter when they hear the sound of the digger looking for Milo. Milo follows them through the cave and to an opening, where they behold Atlantis. They made it. The group of masked Atlanteans attempt to communicate with the explorers. Milo muddles his way through a conversation with the girl, Kita, and they realize they share a common tongue. The Atlanteans know like a bunch of different languages because their language, and really Atlantean culture as a whole, is like the mother culture for all the rest of the other cultures on planet Earth. Milo is ecstatic about everything as they're welcomed into the city. But Helga the femme fatale makes a note to Rourke that there weren't supposed to be people down here. But Rourke tells her that the plan hasn't changed. The crew is introduced to the king, voiced by Leonard Nimoy. Nimoy? Fuck, I don't know how to say that. Our explorers are introduced to the king, who's actually voiced by Leonard Nimoy. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. And the king is not excited to have them here at all. He wants them gone, like, now. But Rourke manages to talk him into giving them a day to resupply and rest and, you know, get ready for another trip out of here. Kida looks disappointed as they're escorted out of the throne room, and we see why when she talks to her dad. You see, Atlantis isn't doing so great. Their people are struggling to find food. It feels like the city and their culture are dying. And Kida thinks that these outsiders might have a new idea that can help them unlock the secrets of their past. But her father tells her that no, their culture is preserved. The people are content, even though they don't know any better. Rourke encourages Milo to talk to Kida and see what exactly the king is hiding, because they can tell that the king is hiding something. Kida and Milo have a back and forth Q&A where she tells Milo that she doesn't know why there's this giant flood, and also there was this bright light that like kidnapped her mom and never gave her back. You know, basically the opening sequence, and now they're here. Also, Kida is like thousands of years old. Milo shows Kida the shepherd's journal and starts asking her about this crystal he thinks is some sort of energy source, like a battery. And Kida is shocked that he can read it because since the giant flood, no Atlanteans have been able to read their own language. What? Kida and Milo work together to get one of these ancient machine vehicles working again, which is the first time basically since she was a child anything like that has worked in Atlantis. Kida and Milo continue exploring the city for a while. Kida brings Milo to this underwater mural to translate some writing, and he realizes that the heart of Atlantis, what he thought was a giant battery, and the bright light that took Kida's mom are the same thing. It keeps all of Atlantis and Atlanteans alive. But nobody really knows where it is. It used to be just above the city at all times, but now it's just missing. When Milo and Kida are heading back after this discovery, Milo finds that the entire crew has turned against him.
You have a nice swim?
Rourke has had the missing page about the heart of Atlantis this entire time, and now they're going to get it and bring it back to the surface to sell it for money. So Rourke forces Milo to translate the page about the heart of Atlantis, under threat of shooting Kida. So they head to the throne room and they beat up the king. Eventually they find this platform that leads them down to this cave. There's the heart of Atlantis, which looks like a bunch of really cool glowing rocks floating around this spinny crystal thing. These are the kings of Atlantis' past. After Rourke disturbs them, their lights turn red, and then they all shine on Kida the same way that they did with her mom. The next scene is so well put together and pretty that it just makes you want to cry a little bit. The visuals, the soundtrack. It's one of those scenes that really stick with you if you see it as a kid. Kida walks across water, is brought up into the crystal, the rocks spin, she's put back down, except now she's like this energy crystal lady. And the visual of her walking back across the water with the rocks falling all around her, but the water unable to touch her.
Nope.
Very nice. And you know what else is really cool? Subscribing to my channel and helping me grow so that I can make more videos. More content is always more fun, right? So like, subscribe, give me your money. Ugh, I want to be a crystal lady. So Rourke and the crew wrap Crystal Kida up and prepare to bring her to the surface. Milo guilts the crew, but Rourke puts him in his place and even punches him, which apparently is just too far for our crew. Stealing a giant crystal and wiping out a civilization? Meh. But punching a well-meaning nerd with glasses? Too far, Rourke. One by one, the named ensemble stand by Milo. And Vinny, the explosion guy, kind of explains their reasoning.
We've done a lot of things we're not proud of. Robbing graves, plundering the tombs, double parking. But nobody got hurt.
So it's not looking good for Milo and the crew as they are outgunned and helpless to watch Rourke as he takes the heart of Atlantis away.
That's the way you want it, fine. More for me. P.T. Barnum was right.
The only bridge connecting to the tunnels that they entered through is blown up. The lights of all of the Atlantean crystals fade, and Atlantis is literally dying without Kida. Things only get worse when Sweet, the doctor, calls Milo up to the throne room. The king is dying of internal bleeding. The king then explains that the crystal, the heart of Atlantis, is sentient and has a consciousness of its own. It chooses a host in times of danger in order to protect itself, and that host has to be of royal blood. First, Kida's mother, and now Kida herself. The king actually tried to use the crystal as a weapon of war, but the crystal didn't like that and caused the destruction of most of Atlantis. Hence the explosion and the giant tsunami in our cold open. That now makes sense. If Kida remains bonded to the crystal, she could be lost forever. So the king begs Milo with his dying breath to save her. So Milo has hit his rock bottom at this point. Sweet gives him a quote from his grandfather where, when you're at the bottom, the only way to go is up. And that inspires Milo to use the machines that he found with Milo and even get the Atlanteans involved. And then they're all gonna go after Rourke. So we've got the Atlantean vehicles and these steampunk airplanes dogfighting in the air and blasting lasers and bullets at each other. Milo is also just wreaking havoc on this balloon, to the point where Rourke throws Helga the Femme Fatale overboard in order to lighten the load. So he and Milo fight, and then Helga from the ground shoots the balloon with a signal flare with her dying breath. Lots of important, dramatic dying breaths here, okay? Then the balloon is falling, and Rourke is going after Milo with an axe, and Milo is running away. But he takes some of this crystal energized piece of glass from Kida's box and slices Rourke on the hand with it. It transforms Rourke in the similar way that it transformed Kida, except something goes horribly wrong and he's more of a crystal creature at this point. But he's taken care of when the balloon explodes. So Milo's got the Kida box and he hooks it up to one of the vehicles and then they get out of Dodge, because the metaphorical Dodge in this place is a now active volcano. So they make it back to Atlantis, but then, the volcano's gonna destroy it. And then Crystal Kida finally now busts out of her box and activates these giant statue guardians. The whole scene is just it's pretty cool. Kida rises into the sky just like her mother, and the statues create the shield, except this time they actually include the crystal and Kida, and the shield domes the city just in time for the lava to flow over top of it. The sound design for this scene is so satisfying. Like, listen. These cracks, those are some good cracks, I'll tell you what. So Atlantis is safe, and Kida is brought back down, and she kind of wakes up to herself. That's a sweet moment. Milo decides that he's going to stay in Atlantis. The crew is loaded up with an enormous amount of gold and their own crystals, and then they're sent up to the surface. On the surface, they're all fabulously wealthy now, and they go over their cover story with Mr. Whitmore. Back in Atlantis, Milo and Kida finish carving her father's face on a new rock, which rises and joins the heart of Atlantis, which now stands above a thriving city. The end. Going into this rewatch, I was under the assumption that all of these negative reviews that Atlantis has gotten on Rotten Tomatoes was caused by one of two things. The reviewer either A, went into it with the wrong expectation, or B, fundamentally misunderstood what kind of movie Atlantis was supposed to be. Atlantis came about just after The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was released. The Atlantis production team literally had shirts made that said, Atlantis, fewer songs, more explosions. I entered this rewatch fully expecting to have a moment where something beloved from my childhood was ruined and my dreams were crushed. But no, I actually still really enjoyed it. Overall, I was actually pretty impressed with how well Atlantis held up. Atlantis was a huge risk for Disney, and it's not very hard to see why. It's a huge departure for what Disney had come to be known for. The tone of Atlantis is darker and grittier, and even the dialogue and the overall conflict skews towards older children. There are a lot of really cool visual moments in Atlantis, and that's partially because the art style was influenced by the art of Mike Mignola, who you might know as the original comic book creator of Hellboy. I might at some point cover Hellboy, so please let me know in the comments below if that's something that you would be interested in seeing. In the documentary Making of Atlantis, The Lost Empire, the production team talks about how the story evolved over time. One of the biggest sections that had to be pared down was when the team gets into the underground cavern and is actually heading towards Atlantis. They realized that they were over an hour and a half into the movie and the adventurers hadn't yet gotten to Atlantis proper. Apparently there were a lot of different monsters and creatures that they would have to fight against, to the point where it was called a monster parade. Squid bats, lava whales, giant buggy land beasts. The original cold open was of Vikings using the Shepherd's Journal to head to a spot in the middle of the sea where their boat is then attacked and destroyed by the Kraken. That sequence was actually fully animated and it was very expensive to produce, except when they saw it in a test run, the head writer was like, hey, you guys are gonna kill me, but I don't think we should start the movie this way, even though we fully produced it. It was a decision for the better, but it's still a cool scene and you can still find that in the documentary that's on YouTube. I wouldn't be mad if Atlantis was picked up by like HBO for a mini-series, so that they could explore some of these more fun ideas. And if you're someone who thinks that Atlantis should be a live-action remake, no, bad. Don't encourage lazy sequels. Bad. No. If it were to be adopted, I would love to see more of the world and more of these creatures, but it would have to fix some of the story issues I'm about to mention, because unfortunately, it does have some issues. I know, I'm not happy about it either. In fact, I don't want to talk about the problems with this movie, so instead, take it away. Come on.
Do I have to keep wearing this? Like, I thought this was
Yes,
just for like
please keep it on. If you're sticking around, it'll make it a lot easier to distinguish between us.
Okay. So the writing.
Yes, the writing. The moment-to-moment writing of Atlantis is fine, good even. In fact, here is a selection of clips where the dialogue made me laugh, or otherwise I just enjoyed it.
I got you 4 basic food groups: beans, bacon, whiskey, and lard.
What have you done? England must never merge with France.
Here, I'm gonna need you to fill these up.
With what?
But the main issues of the writing aren't on a moment-to-moment basis. It's more of like a macro view of the writing. It's the lack of character development in Milo. It's the poor pacing. It's the muddled themes. It's the way that Kida turns into a MacGuffin in Act 3. Since we're in the multiverse, let's pretend that I'm at the writer's room of Atlantis and I get to burst through the door and I get to be like, hey, I'm in charge of the script now and I'm gonna fix it. So here are 3 things that I would do to fix Atlantis. Number 1, let's make Kida an outcast in her own society. You know, have there be more of a connection between her character arc and Milo's character arc. So I want Kida to feel like she's never lived up to her dad's expectations. Like her character arc could probably follow like Moana's or something like that. She wants to see the surface. She wants to understand why her city is dying, and her city is dying in part because her dad doesn't believe that she is capable enough. And it makes sense from her dad's point of view. Her dad wants her to be safe, and there's safety in tradition and not making contact with the surface. Because the last time he did that, you know, he accidentally caused the doom of Atlantis and got his wife killed. Whoops. I'll get back to Kida and her dad in a second and how I envision their arc being resolved. Number 2, let's change Milo's grandpa's backstory. Let's call him Thaddeus for clarity's sake. I want to have Thaddeus die or disappear directly before the events of this movie. Right now it's kind of ambiguous, but it's been implied that he's just, you know, a figure that Milo looks up to and doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on him. No. So I would still have Thaddeus be this big explorer, except I would have him be like really close with Milo. And I want Milo to, directly before the events of this movie, be like, when he's translating the runes, like, I think they got this wrong. I think like the Shepherd's Journal might be in Iceland. So from there, all that Milo knows is that Thaddeus is going on this secret expedition and that Thaddeus has something important to tell him or to show him when he gets back. Except he never gets back. Directly because of that, Milo decides that he is going to make this presentation to the board of the museum because his grandpa's always told him to make his own path and to believe in himself. He's still miserably rejected. He still gets a femme fatale in his apartment, and he still meets Mr. Whitmore. Except when he does meet Mr. Whitmore explains that Thaddeus had gone on this expedition to Iceland for some reason, but he was convinced that the Shepherd's Journal was there. So when Milo gets the Shepherd's Journal, that book suddenly has a lot more weight to it. Changing this could also have interesting implications for Rourke, or whoever we make the main bad guy. So Helga is the big bad, and Helga is the one that leads the expedition to Iceland, where Milo's grandpa goes missing. And At the climax, when she and Milo or she and Kita are fighting or whatever, she says something to the effect of, "Milo, I thought you would be smarter than your grandfather." Implying there that she had his grandfather killed because he objected to her capitalistic end goals of her and her crew or something along those lines. It means more when they fight. Number 3, Milo needs to mess up in a much bigger way. Right now, when Milo is at his rock bottom, he's whining because he led Rourke to Atlantis, and it never would have happened if he hadn't been good at his job. So I want him to mess up a lot more, so that way the rock bottom is a lot lower, and no one is to blame except for Milo's own motivation. So how about Milo tries to stand up for himself, after the swim, if you decide to keep that, to Helga. Except when he does that, Kita gets hurt. Or rather, Helga hurts Kita pretty badly, to the point where Milo immediately gets rid of that self-confidence and thinks that his only way to help Kita is to do what Helga says and to lead her to the king's chamber and to figure out where the Heart of Atlantis' chamber is. And when they do get to the chamber of the Heart of Atlantis, either Helga or Milo has Kita's crystal. They've taken it from her. And Milo makes the connection when the crystal glows and tries to go towards the Heart of Atlantis that those two are connected. He connects the dots all right then and there. Meanwhile, Kita's coming to, and her father has healed her with his own crystal, and it's taken a lot out of him to the point where we're not sure if he's going to live. Kita's asking about Milo and what happened, and it's then that Kita's father decides to tell her about, the consciousness of the crystal. Except the crystal can choose any host that it wants. The problem is that the host has to be worthy and true of self, or whatever. And even if they are worthy and true of self, there's a really good chance that they're still going to be overtaken and, die to the crystal the same way that Kita's mom was. So it's not looking good for Milo. So Kita's trying to get up, and she's looking at her dad in horror when Atlantis starts to shake, because the crystal is trying to make Milo the host. Milo is lifted into the air, except it's not right. All of the self-doubt that he's harboring about himself and that he's received from the museum and the crew and maybe the world at large is swirling around in his head, and he closes his eyes because he doesn't believe that he can do this. And that's when it all goes wrong. The crystal then transforms him in the same way that it transformed Rourke in the original Atlantis. So he drops to the floor in this transmogrified state, and he is the one who ends up getting boxed up like a restaurant leftover that Helga's trying to take to the surface and sell to the highest bidder. Oh snap! And then Kita is suddenly back to where she was as a little girl, helpless and able to do nothing but watch. But she decides, no, she's not a helpless little girl anymore. She is going to do something this time. So she is the one who shows her strength and her leadership, and she's the one that rounds everybody up, and the crew and the Atlanteans alike, to get Milo back and to stop Helga. So she's the one doing all the cool stuff, and eventually she wins. And when they get Milo back to the city, and the volcano can still be exploding, sure, that's fine, she has to give Milo this, pep-up talk where it's like, I believe in you, and the crew believes in you, but you have to believe in yourself, or whatever. And it works, and Milo believes in himself, and the spirit of the crystal, or whatever, rises from him into the Heart of Atlantis, and then it chooses Kita, and Kita could still have the cool transformation scene, and the cool, nice, crackly ASMR of the city being protected as she protects it from the lava. It's not perfect, but you get where I'm going with this. It's a lot more interesting when the characters' direct actions influence the plot and where it goes. And while the theme that I put out isn't overly complex, it doesn't have to be. It's much better to have one theme that's thoroughly explored versus vague ideas of 4 or 5 or 6 different themes. Overall, I really enjoyed Atlantis. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it's still pretty good. And even though the writing issues that I mentioned mean that it's not as impactful as it could be, it's still worth a watch. Whether it's your first time or if it's a rewatch from something that you haven't seen since childhood, I'd recommend it. I guess now would be a good time to talk about the sequel. Spoilers, it's not a real sequel. Atlantis 2, Return of Milo, or Milo's Return, or who cares, wasn't planned to be a movie. It's actually 3 episodes of what would have been a television show following Milo and Kita as they travel around the world looking through different cultures and different mythology, and basically they're looking for Atlantean artifacts in all of these different cultures. And Kida is trying to make her way as a leader of her people and ultimately deciding between whether or not Atlantis should stay underground or if they should emerge and share their gifts with the world. And overall, I think it probably would have done fine, but Atlantis flopped at the box office like oh so many movies, deserving or not, have. But I guess Disney figured, like, hey, we already paid for the animation and the voice acting, and that's expensive. We might as well get our money's worth out of this bad boy. So they just slapped the episodes together and ta-da, a sequel. That's about all I gotta say about that. My name is Kyrie. This is Ellie.
That's
this
not
has been
my
Flights
name.
of Fantasy. And until next time, live well and appreciate the powerful, pretty crystal ladies in your life. Or something like that.